From James Gunn taking the MCU where it's never gone before, to how his movie could affect the entire industry, here's the real reason Guardians of the Galaxy fans are pissed. James Gunn really pushed the limits on the darkness of his trilogy, especially considering that it's part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. The MCU has touched on hard topics before, with Phase 4 of the franchise diving into grief in Black Panther: Wakanda Forever, showing us the brutal history of the partition of India and Ms. Marvel, and putting the child trafficking of Natasha Romanoff on screen in Black Widow. But these are ultimately PG-13 movies in Disney's biggest franchise, so the gloves have usually been on when it comes to this sort of dark material. Gunn, on the other hand, decided to leave nothing off the table for Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, going all the way in portraying the horror and the tragedy of Rocket Raccoon's past, and giving us the MCU's most horrible villain. That's triggered a debate in the fandom, not to mention the movie industry in general, as everyone's arguing over how much animal cruelty is too much animal cruelty. We can't talk about that debate without first looking at what's causing it. So here's the backstory of Rocket Raccoon, as penned by the MCU's former Rockstar director. Rocket used to be a normal raccoon from Earth, the kind that could be looting around in your trash right now. But one day, he and a pack of his fellow raccoons were kidnapped by the maniac known as the High Evolutionary, a scientist whose goal is to play God with all living beings and perfecting them. The things he values above all else are intelligence and the ability to lead a civilized life. And to that end, he performs gruesome and painful operations on Rocket to give him the ability to walk on two legs, not to mention experimenting on Rocket's brain. The only comfort Rocket finds in this terrible life is the group of friends he makes in prison, and they hope that they'll get to live in the counter-Earth that the High Evolutionary is creating. However, Rocket and his friends eventually outlive their usefulness to their insane captor, and the High Evolutionary kills all of Rocket's friends, with Rocket himself only barely managing to escape. Throughout these flashbacks, we see the High Evolutionary experimenting on even more animals, coldly disposing of them if the experiments fail, or if he changes his mind about things. Now, obviously, it's hard watching a character we've come to care about suffer like this, but for a lot of people, the problem wasn't with Rocket specifically. They were more upset about the blatant animal cruelty on screen. It's never been okay to torture animals for any reason, and since the 80s, every movie has to have a guarantee from the American Humane Society that no animals were harmed during filming. But the movement for animal rights has grown over the years, and tons of people all over the world refuse to eat meat unless they know that the animals were treated humanely, while others choose vegetarian or vegan lifestyles because they think that consuming an animal can never be humane. There are even websites like doesthedogdie.com, where movie and TV fans warn each other about upsetting moments in popular media, and you can imagine what they think of Guardians 3. Yeah, it ain't getting away with the excuse that the tortured animals were CG. These attitudes are reflected in the media we see, with characters like John Wick going on murderous rampages because someone killed their pet, and people relate to these kinds of stories very strongly. There's no doubt that James was trying to do the same thing in Guardians, using animal cruelty to make the High Evolutionary the most despicable villain in MCU history. Job well done, Mr. Gunn, but you may have gone a bit too far. The director's been accused of walking right up to the line of being sadistic in these scenes, and that he should have shown a lot more restraint. Not just because the scenes are upsetting, but because the movie has somehow managed a PG-13 rating. Like every other MCU movie, Guardians Volume 3 is rated PG-13, meaning that anyone over 13 years old can watch the movie by themselves, and under 13-year-olds can only watch with their parents. The film was officially known to contain intense sequences of violence and action, strong language, suggestive drug references, and thematic elements. Anyone who's seen the movie can tell you that intense sequences of violence is a massive understatement. Common Sense Media, a site that advises parents on movies and other media, is plastered with warnings about the violence, rating the movie a 4 out of 5 on violence and scariness, while parents on the site warn that the PG-13 rating is super misleading. The authorities that confirmed the rating didn't explain how they gave Guardians 3 a PG-13 rating, but their British authority, BBFC, did talk about their decision to give it a 12A rating. Their chief executive, David Austin, explained that a 12A rating comes with guidelines, which leaves room for moderate physical and psychological threat and horror sequences, and that disturbing scenes are okay as long as the movie isn't disturbing overall, and finally, horror sequences should be rare and short. I guess Guardians edges through those guidelines, but that raises a question. Should the guidelines be adjusted? The fact that the movie was able to get these ratings with such an extreme amount of animal cruelty reflect the priorities of the rating bodies, and it looks like human violence is worse for them than animal violence. Guardians 3 takes it a lot easier on the human or humanish characters, aside from what Rocket does to the High Evolutionary and Revenge, and that's how it ended up with a PG-13 rating. Some fans have argued that these priorities are wrong, and you might have teens going to see movies with intense animal violence, which will be just as upsetting for them as human violence would be, possibly even more upsetting. No one is saying that Hollywood can't make the movies it wants to make, and the gut punchiness is part of what makes Guardians 3 so powerful, but ratings should be handed out based on the content. The other side of the argument, though, is that things aren't that simple, and these ratings have more power than you'd think. Studios these days actually try to avoid R ratings if they can, and the reason is pretty obvious if you think about it. If a movie is rated R, only 18-year-olds and above can watch it by themselves, which really limits the audience for the movie. Putting that together with the history of superheroes as family-friendly content, and you can see why Marvel and DC are unwilling to let their movies get R ratings. James Gunn is one of the few people who got to make an R-rated superhero movie with DC's The Suicide Squad, while the third Deadpool is the one and only one R-rated flick in development at the MCU. Changing the standards for ratings will definitely impact both of these franchises, because the boundaries for the filmmakers will always be whatever they can get away with in a PG-13 rating. That'd be a shame, because Gunn was really trying to push the boundaries of what you can do in a superhero movie. And I'm sure he didn't want to spoil things for other filmmakers in the process. But this goes beyond superhero movies, as the fear of the dreaded R rating is an industry-wide problem. There was a time in the film industry when Hollywood was super restrictive, and that really limited the stories that the creatives could tell. The relaxation of rating standards over the decades was great news, because it opened the doors for movies to go places where they could never go before, all without getting an R rating and losing a huge chunk of the audience. I don't think anyone wants things to start going the other way, and by tightening the guidelines around the PG-13 rating, that could be what ends up happening. Now, to an extent, this is also Hollywood's fault, since avoiding the R rating is a choice that they've made, but that's the system that everyone has to work in. A better solution is for people to be more selective of the movies they choose to watch. I mentioned two resources in this video, Common Sense Media and DoesTheDogDie.com, that could help anyone avoid the disturbing elements of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, regardless of their age or the type of content they're wary of. All things considered, Guardians 3 was a huge success for the franchise, meaning that people were mostly okay with the content of the movie at the rating it has. So let's not do something crazy like change the way movies are made. From the potential effects on the future of Hollywood to James Gunn's bold and dark choices, that was the real reason Guardians of the Galaxy fans are pissed.